Hello, all. Hope it was a good weekend for you. It was in the 80s in Buffalo, and as you can tell, I got a little sun because I was doing some painting outside. Usually my color is completely white, and it'll go back to white from red. Um, Today, Russ informs me that is the 75th birthday of Bugs Bunny, the well-known Warner Brothers cartoon character. I always thought that Bugs Bunny was pretty hilarious. I always loved the Warner Brothers cartoons. Russ, I always liked the Warner Brothers cartoon characters more than Disney. I always thought like Mickey and Daffy and Goofy were lame, and that or Donald Duck was lame, and that Daffy Duck and Foghorn Leghorn and all the Warner Brothers ones were cool. Am I?
No, I liked them better. I wouldn't call Disney's lame, but I liked them better. I have good Bugs Bunny memories, like when he's playing baseball, and it's like first base and Bugs Bunny, second base Bugs Bunny, and he had that slow ball, but he did everything. Bugs Bunny played basketball. He wrestled the Crusher. He's the greatest athlete of our time, if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it takes courage to call Mickey Mouse overrated. I actually agree with you on the characters, but Mickey Mouse is an institution. Like he's like more American than apple pie and Chevrolet, and those are pretty American. Mickey Mouse is that's the symbol. So
We know Mickey Mouse was a New Jersey Devils fan. No, but yeah, I mean, no, I was always like, Daffy and Bugs was always the cool, the cool character. Always sort of had, especially with Elmer Fudd and some of the other characters, always was like playing the jokes, was always pulling their leg, was always antagonizing the bull, and the Warner Brothers cartoons. If you look at them and compare to some of the cartoons of today, how violent were they? Like the coyote dropping off the cliff.
The anvil. We all think about the anvil, yeah.
Yeah, well, you don't see that today anymore. You don't.
The cartoons of yesteryear, though, were definitely directed toward the idea that they would be shown before for adults. I mean, when we went to the movies when I was a kid, you got two cartoons, and you would get a pretty sophisticated cartoon. I mean, they were fun for the kids because they were animated, but it was the adults that were getting the humor as well. So I think that's sort of why they were so violent, is that everybody sort of knew it was really adults that were watching these anyway. So
yeah, and the anti-war propaganda—that's how they came about, anyhow, right? So
yeah, what's really funny though is like how big Saturday morning cartoons were. Like, when I was a kid, when the fall lineup was coming out, like that was a big week.
It was.
Like when were your cartoons coming out on Saturday morning, and there would be a big discussion in the neighborhood about what was happening on Saturday morning. So now they don't even really have Saturday morning cartoons.
They have a couple. I know they have some, but it's not like it used to be.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that I in doing a little research before the show, thought this was a little interesting. Actor Jake Gyllenhaal, who's doing the press tour for this new movie Southpaw, it's about MMA. He was being interviewed on the Howard Stern show, and apparently when he was 10 years old in 1992, he was up for a role in the Mighty Ducks movie, but his parents would not let him be in the movie. I guess they wanted him to go to school, and he couldn't do it with his schedule, and he was really upset that he couldn't be in the Mighty Ducks movie. Kevin, I don't know about you, but I've always thought the Mighty Ducks was one of the most overrated hockey movies, and thought it was sort of lame, and I think I watched it once, and like I look at that movie with no appreciation and no excitement if it's on TV.
Well, to me, it's a little bit different, and I think most people with kids, like my kids, all love those movies. So, to me, I'm just like, would I rate it among my all-time favorites? No, not even close. But I just remember my kids liked it, and so to me, I have a different feeling for it just because of that. I mean, there's some pretty goofy movies that I think of fondly just because I remember watching them with my kids, and when kids see things so differently. So I still have a fondness for the the Mighty Ducks. And I do remember the silliness though of everybody just laughing when the Ducks, when Anaheim got a franchise and said they were going to call it the Mighty Ducks. Like I actually thought that was kind of fun. It was sort of brilliant, because the Mighty Ducks obviously was such a hot licensing property, and it really did work in the first year or two, because they got a lot of marketing zing from the Mighty Ducks logo. But after the newness wore off, then it lost something.
Yeah, I was never a Mighty Ducks fan. I think Gyllenhaal, his parents, made a solid career move by not getting attached to it. Although he said if they redid it, he would be happy to be the new coach. So he's like already pushing Emilio Estevez aside and basically saying, "I'll take his job." And
the new Gordon Bombay. There you go.
But I have no reverence for and it's not because I don't like silly movies. Like Sandlot to me is just 1,000 times better. Like to put an equal sort of movie to it. So that's just me.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, put me along with Pete Weber. I'm a Slapshot guy. I know Slapshot is not for kids, and I know it's dated, but it's a hilarious, fantastic movie. It's not like an Oscar winner or anything like that, but it's great. And anything that's been done after it, I mean, I think Miracle was pretty decent. Like Mystery Alaska, I mean, I don't know how many you could say really good hockey movies are out there. I know that a lot of people nowadays are thinking Goon, the movie Goon was good.
Yeah, Goon was good. I thought it was good. I went on the junket for that. I liked it. Liev Schreiber is a great actor, so I thought he really did do a great job, considering he's not a sports guy. One that's very underrated as being like funny, but it's not meant to be funny, is Idol of the Crowds, the one John Wayne did. And because like John Wayne didn't know how to skate, that was pretty obvious. So he would skate like 3 feet on the ice, and then they would do a cut scene, and he was the biggest guy there. And they had some hockey players in that movie, but like back then, John Wayne was way bigger than anybody that was in the NHL. So
I don't think I've ever seen that one.
Yeah, it's hard to find. I have a copy on VHS that I got, but you can see it on AMC once in a while. And I'm not sure it's out of print, but it is kind of goofy in the sense that the mob is running hockey, and it's got that kind of feel to it. And Youngblood, I know a lot of people are soft on Youngblood, so
Yeah, well, the only plus with Youngblood is it actually had some NHL players, and I think Peter Zezel and Steve Thomas were in it.
Yeah.
And a young Keanu Reeves as the goaltender. But
I really like Miracle quite a bit. I rate that as among my top 10 movies for sure, sports movies. Not quite with Field of Dreams, which was one of my all-time favorite, but right up there. And but I'm a Slapshot guy. Like to me, just the satire and of that era, and the lines, like in your head you're always running those lines. You go to a box, you feel shame. I just loved all those.
My dad was against seeing it when it was in the movies because he's like, come on, Paul Newman is a hockey player. And then he eventually watched it after the fact and realized, wow, he really pulled it off.
Yeah.
That's why it wasn't a big hit initially, because I think a lot of other people felt like, could Paul Newman really play this kind of part? Even though he was a great actor, it wasn't really something you would expect him to play.
Well, it's funny because somebody I know, an author named Jonathan Jackson, wrote a book about the making of Slapshot a few years ago. If you wanted to find this book, look it up on Amazon. It's out there. It's really, really good. But the funny thing was that Paul Newman was not the original choice. I always love these stories. Paul Newman was not the original choice for Reg Dunlop. Originally, the choice was Al Pacino. And Al Pacino wanted to play Reg Dunlop, and I guess in interviews later in his career said, one of my regrets was not playing that role after seeing Paul Newman do it. But there was a disagreement between, him with getting the right director and things of that nature, and it just didn't work out. But can you imagine Al Pacino as Reg Dunlop?
It's hard, but I couldn't have imagined Newman, to be honest. So he probably could pull it off.
Yeah, and not only did he pull off, he was terrific.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think Pacino could probably pull it off, even though we can't imagine it.
Yeah, the problem is once you see the movie with the people in it, it's hard to think of someone else doing the role. But
yeah,
I agree. I think Pacino's such a tremendous actor that it probably would have. So yeah, I'm always. It's tough for me to talk about movies with people because when I go to see a movie, I go expecting to be entertained. Like I am not a scorekeeper. Like I know the difference between a good movie and a bad movie, but I'm amazed that people will pay good movie and then come out and just complain and go on. I mean, I'm just not like that. Like my kids say all the time that I can find something redeeming in any movie. I mean, I go and
something redeeming in Ishtar.
no, that's the exception. So. But you know what I mean? Like, it's such a modern thing, particularly now in social media. Like, you come out of a movie, and right away you're a movie reviewer. I mean, it's on there, and mostly, as I saw a social media expert, and says, it's easier to say bad things about something than it is to say good things. So, that's why the ratings of most movies are so poor with on social media, is because it's easier to be funnier. If you wanna rip it, but
Russ, you went down the Ishtar route. What the heck? I mean, I was thinking Heaven's Gate or something like that, but
it's like Ishtar, Heaven's Gate, Waterworld. Like that's the trifecta of bad movies.
I got one for you too. The English Patient too, which
I didn't even
won an Oscar.
I know. I that's one of the most mystifying things ever to me because I like artsy films. I usually am entertained by those, and I like to see how they're filmed and everything. But I went to that, and I remember I was with my wife, and I walked out and said, I just don't understand why everyone says this is the greatest. I mean, it was depressing, and the story wasn't even all that interesting, and I just didn't get it. Didn't they make a whole Seinfeld episode about that too?
Yeah, they did.
So
yeah, well, I mean, and we'll do this some other day, but I'll tell you that. One of the worst movies. When a sequel comes out, most people think that the sequel is never going to be as good as the original. But I remember there was a ramp up of excitement for the sequel to 48 Hours with Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, and that movie was the sequel was so horrific. I walked out after the first 25 minutes. It was that bad. So, okay, let's get to hockey here. Russ, you started off. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Monday, July 27th, 2015.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Kevin Allen from USA Today Sports.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Eck has the day off. He's getting his back taken care of, and he'll be back tomorrow for the Buzzcast.
No pun intended.
Yes, no pun intended. But we have plenty of news from over the weekend and from this morning. Starting off, Russ, with the Derek Stepan contract. Him and the Rangers avoided arbitration. They agreed on a 6-year deal for $39 million, $6.5 million AAV for the 25-year-old center. What did you think of this contract? And now with the Rangers, I mean, they have almost everybody signed. What do you think of their status right now?
Well, this was like the best possible contract for the Rangers because I remember I had a discussion with some people, and I thought that this was the ideal deal. But even I felt like this deal was going south and, north of the price. I thought it was going to, be like $7 million. But this is a great deal. It's a great deal. Look, Stepan's getting a nice raise, so there's no argument there. Mm-hmm. But based on what other players were making, it was conceivable he might have been getting 7 out of this, and maybe even 7 years. And so the fact is, this is a good deal. They have him until he's 30 now. I don't think they'll be looking to get out of this one. He's a really good player on the ice. He does everything well. We know he's not number one center, but he does fill the role, and they don't have anybody in the foreseeable future to fill that role. So at least that's something that they have shored up for now. Look, 57 points is his career high. I think the most you'll ever see out of him is like 65. But if he stays around that point mark, that's fine because of everything else he gives you. He is an intangibles guy. We sort of hate to say that word. And now as far as the Rangers go, look, Jeff Gorton's done a great job in the offseason. I mean, haggling aside, there was nothing they could do. There were previous contracts. Basically, the Tanner Glass and Dan Boyle made Hagelin have to go. If they didn't have those contracts, Hagelin would have been able to be re-signed. But that's just the way the cap is, right? So you move on and you say, all right, that's a good summer for Gorton. I heard general manager said there's about $425 left under the regular cap, not the summer. And so that's pretty good. Now, if they had an injury, yeah, maybe there'd be another move down the road that'd have to be made, or maybe there'd still be one more just to have a little wiggle room. But otherwise, they're pretty set, and their defense didn't really get compromised. If their offense isn't compromised much more than it was last year, they'll be right in there. So I think they had a good summer.
Kevin, with Stepan signing and with Brassard in place, neither one of them are number one centers, but Stepan's under $7 million, as Russ said. Brassard's making $5 million. 11.5 for those two centers is not bad based on some of the other contracts that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, they're not Crosby and Malkin, but the Penguins are paying above $17 million for those two, almost $18 million. So when you look in that regard, the Rangers have to be pretty happy with those two. I didn't actually believe he was going to get $7 million simply because everybody was talking Ryan O'Reilly, but his free agency was imminent after this next season, and you had to pay because of that. You had to prevent him from going to free agent. Stepan actually had 2 years, so he didn't have the same hammer that O'Reilly had. It was a great signing. This is why we have arbitration. I have this argument with readers all the time. Players, no one expects players to go to arbitration. What you expect is arbitration will force the two sides together, and that's the threat of it. And I think that's what we happen here. And I thought Russ's analysis was right on the mark. They've done a good job getting everybody in. Did they sign JT Miller? They must have. I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, Miller they signed. Yeah, he and I want to say it was reasonable. Like I want to say $535 or something in that range, $635. It was something pretty reasonable per year. So yeah, they fit him in.
Yeah, well, I knew they would fit him in. I just missed the signing, but. They're basically going to be the same team they were a season ago. And I mean, they lost Hagelin and that speed, but as we all know, Emerson Atem can move as well, not nearly as polished, and his level of consistency. But Hagelin was really, really fast, but it wasn't like he was a great finisher. So I think this was a real good summer, as Russ said. For the Rangers, just maintaining what they have.
Yeah. Now, Russ, the one thing that in looking at their cap situation now, like you said, it's a little under $1 million, or around $500,000 based on.
I think the summer cap is like a little under $1 million. I think that's what I've seen that figure. General manager had it at $425. I think he was going regular cap.
Right.
Or she. We really don't know who owns general manager, so it could be a she. I don't want to discriminate.
Right. Now the thing is though, if you look at it, they might be set up for one more year because before the cap crunch really hits, because I mean they have Kreider as an RFA next year, they as well as Hayes and Miller and Edom again, and then they lose. Or they could lose Moore and Yandel and Boyle as UFAs next summer. I'm sure they probably want to try to re-sign one or two of those guys. I mean, do you think this is set up for one more kick at the can, or do you think this is something that can be stretched a little further?
I think they're going to see if they could stretch it, but I guess it'll all depend on what they get out of Yandel this year. And if they seem like they're getting a lot, then is he going to be a guy that they can retain? Because, again, Yandel on the open market, if he'd have been on the open market this year, they wouldn't be able to afford him, right? Now, next year, some salaries free up. Like you said, Boyle, that's an extra 4.5, whatever he makes. And Glass, that's an extra $1.5 million. And there are a few others that drop off. So there's a possibility they could retain him. And I guess that's the question. They have a kid, Brady Shea, who's coming out of Minnesota. He'll start off, he played a little bit last year in Hartford. He'll play a little bit more this year there, and then maybe he'll challenge for the team. Maybe he won't this year, but by next year he very well could. And he skates great, and he's a very strong kid. He's got a little bit of offense, nothing like Yandel. But I don't think they need another offensive defenseman anyhow. I think that was just a luxury they picked up. Technically, McDonough could fill the role, even though it's not the ideal role for him. So I think they've got a little flexibility there, and they've got another year to see how Shea goes. Because if Shea doesn't develop to the way they'd hoped, then they might have to try and re-sign Yandel.
Moving on, the signing that happened just after the Buzzcast on Friday, Kevin, Braden Holtby and the Caps agreed 6 years, $30.5 million. It's a little over $6 million as an AAV. He's also 25 years old. Now, in this situation, the Caps bought a lot of unrestricted years away, and he's not on the top level making as much as Lundqvist and Rene, but it's just that little step below, which I think is correct for somebody who has looked good but hasn't really proven that he's an elite goaltender.
Yeah, I mean, the contract really fell within the range that I think everybody would have guessed it would have fallen into. And, it's an important signing for the Capitals, who have a lot of faith in his ability. And to me, for the Capitals bringing in Barry Trotz and then Mitch Korn as the goaltending coach, if Mitch has signed on saying that Holtby is the guy for the future, I think it's a little easier for the Capitals to commit long term. I mean, when you have Barry Trotz and the new guy saying the same things than the old guys did, then it was an important signing. So, and from a goalie's perspective, I've said this for the longest time. Like, when they offer you a long-term contract, you almost have to take it, because you just don't know what the free agent market is going to look like when it's your turn to hit it. It was rare this year because we had a lot of different teams looking for goalies. But we've seen other years when there's no one looking for goalies, and goalies have been forced to take a lot less money than they thought they were going to get. So if someone is offering you a very good contract and you're happy in that situation, the rule of thumb for a goalie is you take it and be happy with it.
Now, Russ, depending on the source, the Capitals have around 4.3 million left under their cap. Now, we know during the offseason a team can go 10% over, so that's really not a limitation. But they have another RFA who's going to arbitration this week, in Marcus Johansson, and the amounts came out. Johansson's asking for 4.75 in arbitration. The Caps are offering 3. Probably ends up somewhere in the middle, but if they go to arbitration and he gets over 3.8, as that Chuck Gormley article that we discussed a little while back, they could conceivably walk away from Johansson. I don't think they're going to do that because he's 24 years old and he's a good player, but they're really up against it in a way.
Yeah, I think he's going to end up with like 3.77. It's going to be something like that, and I think that's the way it's going to go. I think they still do need him, and I still do think they'd rather have him than sort of see if some of their other rookies are ready. Because last year they did try and put in Burakovsky, and at times he fit, and at times he didn't fit. And Jakub Vrana is close, right? So, if they get rid of Johansson, then they sort of have to slide Vrana in and hope he's ready. Right. If they can bring in Johansson for, at least another year, then that gives Vrana a little more time to see if he's ready to make the team, and if not, let him play more in Hershey, because he only got a short look in Hershey last year. And I think that's important, and I think that's the way they'll go, because that's usually the way they try and develop over there. Ross Mahoney's really, he's kind of patient with that.
Yeah, the interesting situation now with Holtby signing, because the other big goalie still facing an arbitration hearing is Jonathan Bernier of the Leafs, but the difference is that the Leafs elected to go to arbitration with Bernier. He's 1 year away from being a UFA. More than likely, if it goes to goes to arbitration, it's going to be a 1-year deal, and then they have both their goaltenders as UFAs next summer. And I mean, I don't know what the situation, Kevin, with that organization in transition with Lamoriello coming in, whether they want to lock up Bernier for 2, 3, 4 years, making $5 million when that team is in rebuilding mode.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's interesting. Like, I think more was expected from Bernier, but when you look at it, his goals against, or particularly his save percentage in the 2 years, playing for the weak defensive team that he did, save percentage numbers are pretty good. He's done okay, and I don't think anyone thought he was a bad goalie. While he was there, so I think that's a judgment call that I think it's a hard decision, to be honest with you, because The minute you get rid of your goalie, you got to find another one, and you never know what's going to be available. So I think he's been a solid NHL goalie, and I wouldn't want to make that decision. If you're rebuilding, you kind of want to get a young goalie to grow with the team, but they don't seem to have that guy. So.
Right, and if they have both Reimer and Bernier going to UFA next year, then they're definitely going to be looking for at least one and maybe two, and that could be costly when they really don't want to be spending top money to get a goaltender in there because they're in a state of flux right now. The other arbitration settlement.
Actually, I was going to add one thing. Back in the day, I think Ralph Kiner, when he was with the Pirates, hit like 50 homers. One of his great years. Coming off a great year, he walks into the GM office, and their negotiating tactic was, we'll be in last place with you, we'll be in last place without you, no raise, right? And so luckily Bernier won't have to go through that, but I think they should get him on a 2-year term, and I still have always thought that they should, part ways with Reimer. And I think ultimately with Antoine Bibeau, you're probably looking at 2 years, and that's the best case scenario. So I think they should at least get Bernier locked up for 2.
Yeah, I don't think Reimer will not be a Leaf by the deadline. I think he'll be traded someplace that needs a veteran backup goaltender, or I don't think he's a starter anymore. But that's my opinion. The other settlement of arbitration was Colin Wilson from the Preds. Kevin, I think this was the best value. I mean, he scored 20 goals for the first time last year, 42 points. He's 25 years old. It's less than $4 million, and based on some of the numbers that are out there, less than $4 million for Colin Wilson for 4 years is pretty good.
Yeah, it's decent, and we've talked about him before. How he got up to a really good start and was among their better players, and then he kind of fell off the map at the end of the regular season, and then picked up his production in the postseason when you really needed it. So I still think they believe he's got an upside as well. Like I don't think when they drafted Wilson they thought he was going to be a 45-point guy. I think they expected more out of him. So, he obviously has a good hockey DNA, and he's got some size, and I think he was cognizant of the Predators' payroll situation. That fits in pretty well. The Predators, other than Shea Weber, don't like to hand out big contracts. They try to give everybody there in a reasonable fit. So, he might have taken one for the team a little bit in that regard.
Yeah, and his dad, Carey, probably said, hey, take the money. Look what I was making. He probably, was making like $500,000 or something back in the day. But I think Colin Wilson, if he gets consistent power play time and can play in the crease a little more, can average 20 to 25 goals a year and get a bit more on the assist side. So I think he could be a 50-point guy at least. Maybe even go a little higher. I think that's a really good signing, though. I mean, it's good for both sides.
Now, Russ, I'm a little skeptical of this one. Over the weekend, the Devils extended Adam Larson for 6 years. He's going to be making $4.1 per year. He's had one, and last year was his first year where I think he's had 24 points. He's a former top 5 overall pick, but he's been pretty inconsistent. He came off his entry-level deal. He had a one-way deal. He had his best year, but they've locked him up long-term. I think this is all on potential and not on what he has shown so far. I'm a little hesitant.
No, I disagree. This is a kid that had almost a different coach every year. I think that we in the media, and not me, but some other people had higher expectations point-wise for him. I never had high expectations point-wise. I just thought he was going to be a really terrific defenseman, and that's sort of taken a little time. But, again, what is he, 23, 24? That's when you come into your prime as a defenseman anyhow, sometimes 25, 26. So I think he's fine. I mean, his skating's really good. I saw him get more physical last year. I saw him play the kind of defense you'd like. And, hey, if they can get 20, 25 points every year, that's fine. I don't think they're looking for him to be their top power play guy or anything like that. So for the money they paid him, I think it's really well worth it. And I think he will be really good. I don't think by any stretch, for people that thought he was going to be a bust like 2 years ago, that he's heading down that route.
I think this contract to me almost seemed to be an apology to Larson for rushing him. I think that's the perception around the league is they brought him in too quickly when he really wasn't ready, and had he'd been brought in, if he'd given one more year and started, he might not have had been so slow to develop the way he was. His development has been a little bit slow, but I think last season people felt that he was starting to be the player everyone thought he was going to be. So, $4 million plus is sort of right in that range. Like, you're not paying him like an all-star. He's a little bit more than your average defenseman. But these days, as I say all the time, if you have a pulse and you play defense, the starting pay is $2.5 million, and then it just goes from there. So, I think they're pretty happy with this signing.
Yeah, and sometimes, when Nashville signed Roman Josi, I think it was 2 years ago, and they signed him for 5 or 6 years, around $4 million, people sort of, were hesitant about the fact that, okay, he's had one good year and given him a long-term commitment. And now, 2 years down the road, they say, wow, you got Roman Josi at $4 million. So it could be a real big benefit to Ray Shero and the Devils if Larson improves on last year and becomes the defenseman that they think he's going to be. But that's what I'm saying. Right now, he hasn't shown, I think, enough to make me feel comfortable that he's worth that. But next year, if he has another good year, then it's a good gamble. Okay, touching a little bit on expansion news. We don't want to go and we know that Vegas and Quebec City were the only two applicants. Commissioner Gary Bettman made some interesting comments over the weekend to the Boston Globe, saying that he is open to the possibility of the Quebec City expansion team, if they are awarded one, starting in the Western Conference for further reasons, not splitting up the divisions into 4 or 5 like we did on a previous webcast, but to stay with the 32. Well, to stay with 2 conferences of 16 teams. Also indicated that the declining Canadian dollar would not be a factor if they decide to expand and make it 8 Canadian teams. But also, Kevin, and this is what I thought was interesting, said there's no guarantee we're going to expand by 2 or even by 1. So he's not committing to anything right now.
No. Well, that's been his MO for a long time, and he's often criticized for the way he runs his business. But, he runs it like a CEO, which he is. And, most businesses, the top CEOs don't make moves based on public opinion. And he doesn't either. And, he'll look at the situation. I think it was possible that they would have only gone with 1. But with 2 applicants, I think they'll take both. That's my feeling. Had there been 3 or 4, they might have only taken 1. I think it's a possibility. But when there's only 2, I think, and one being a Canadian franchise, I think they probably feel obligated, and really not to bring in Quebec City. Everyone in the league office knows that ultimately that's going to work. They just want to do it when they want it. But right now it just makes too much sense to go with both teams.
Well, and here's the other thing, though. The NHL did invite the guy in charge of the Seattle group to the league offices last Tuesday to sort of see where they're at, even though the deadline passed. So that does make you wonder if Seattle is on the long-term radar still. They might be, because they're still trying to raise money, or financing rather, for their arena. And why would the NHL want to meet with the lead guy for that if the door is closed on it? So I'm not even sure the door is closed on Seattle either for down the road.
Oh yeah, but that's never really been an issue. Like, they didn't say this would be their only expansion. And let's face it, of all the markets that's been talked about, Seattle's the best.
Right.
Like, the only issue is the arena.
Right.
And Bettman has said that they're not gonna they wouldn't accept the existing arena even on a temporary basis. So they need a new arena, and I think that gives the league a much a market with good television appeal, and completes sort of their Northwest footprint. And So I think they want to go there. So I wouldn't be shocked at all that we see, 2 here, and then in a couple of years, it's a possibility we could see 2 more.
I mean, Russ, the one thing that, and I heard this, and there was a pretty good point on the weekend, that right now, if the NHL takes Vegas and Quebec City, if a franchise like Arizona or Florida all of a sudden decide that they need to move based on the financial situation, there's no place to go. I mean, Kansas City has a rink, but the two leading contenders for a team in terms of a transfer would have been Vegas and Quebec City, and if they're both taken up by expansion, then maybe then Seattle is on the radar in terms of maybe 2-3 years down the road after they build their building, they're in line for a transfer as well, or an expansion team.
Right. That's the long term. But I hear the Portland rink is really nice, and we don't know. The NHL hasn't looked at it. We don't, or at least commented on it. Maybe they have looked at it. And so, like, if there needs to be that emergency rink, and and Kansas City's out of the mix now, then maybe it's the Portland one. So that's that's one that I would eye and say they would have a chance down the road for something like that.
Yeah, and plus I don't think neither Florida nor the Coyotes, both of whom are thought to be the potential teams that could eventually be moved, neither one of them is on the critical list.
Right.
Viola, the owner in Florida, the league really likes him, and he seems very committed to trying to make that work down there. And with Arizona getting the deal done that they did, it doesn't seem like they have any issues either. So at least nothing imminent. So I think by the time, if indeed those teams end up having issues, by then the landscape will look different.
Yeah, the deal with Glendale was only 2 years, and the $15 million that they were getting to run the arena is now down to $6.5 million, which virtually guarantees them reaching the loss amount that they would need to be able to move in a couple years. So I think it's sort of like this is probably the final 2 years in Glendale before they either move to another rink in the Phoenix area, if that's the direction they want to go, or if they go someplace else. But I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that this is going to last any longer than the 2 years of this current agreement. So.
Yeah.
Okay, and just to report this, because I don't know if anybody at the Sabres announced the firing of team president Ted Black this morning. Interesting that the current Buffalo Bills team president Russ Brandon is now taking over the Sabres job as well, which you have two guys in similar positions. They're both under the same ownership of Terry and Kim Pagula, so I guess they're eliminating one job and one salary, so that makes a bit of sense. In the press release, it said that the Sabres GM Tim Murray will continue to oversee hockey operations for the organization and report directly to Tim and Terry and Kim Pagula, which to Sabres fans is a little bit of a reason for concern, because when Mr. Pagula came in a few years ago and Darcy Regier was the GM, Kevin, he essentially gave Regier carte blanche to spend as much money as he wanted, and Regier went out and signed Ville Laino and Christian Ehrhoff and made some sort of ill-advised signings. Now, I don't think Murray's going to do that. I think he realizes where the Sabres are currently, but the Pagulas having a little more influence in hockey operations or direct connection to Murray and hockey operations, I think makes Sabres fans a little bit uneasy.
Yeah, and I think that's true in all of sports. When the owners has his fingers in the pie, it's always worrisome for fans because you just don't know where their level of expertise is at. We know they're successful businessmen. I mean, Pagula's worth almost $4 billion, but what does he know about building a hockey team? And we don't know yet, even in Buffalo, because they haven't been remotely a good hockey team. Mm-hmm. So I get that, but it's a different situation, Darcy Regier and Murray. So yeah. I'm sure they're comfortable, and a lot of times the team president doesn't know a lot about hockey either. So that model's changing a little bit now with guys like Luc Robitaille in L.A. and Brian Burke and Calgary and John Davidson and so forth. But I guess we're just going to have to give Pagula the benefit of the doubt. Like, this is a guy that really cares about his team,
Oh, yeah.
and he wants to be successful. So, I guess you got to trust his business instincts.
Sure. And Russ.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if I'm a Sabres fan, I'd have to just say, hey, I still have a team, and they still spend more money than the cap floor, so I'm gonna have to live with that because that's good.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people put, and there's no way to really know how much influence Black had with the hiring of Dan Bylsma. I mean, everybody had that connection. There was a lot of ex-Pittsburgh Penguin connections in the management structure of the Sabres. Black, I don't know if Craig Patrick is still an advisor with the team, but a lot of people put two and two together when it came to Bylsma being the choice as coach. And now, if it was a factor, the team president who was formerly with the Penguins is no longer part of the organization. So I don't know. Maybe I'm overemphasizing the Penguin connection, but it was always put together and always mentioned.
I think you are, because I don't think Black was ever really in the long-term plan because he was so tied to Darcy Regier that the talk was always that Black was going to go at some point. So I was just sort of not surprised. Like, okay, it happened now. Makes sense to me.
Yeah. Now, shifting here, on Friday is the trade deadline for Major League Baseball. MLB has a different type of trade deadline than I'll choose the NFL and the NHL here. Major League Baseball has the non-waiver trade deadline on July 31st, and then a waiver trade deadline on August 31st. Then you can actually still make deals after August 31st, but the players are not eligible to play in the postseason if you do.
Right.
Now, the NHL, as we know, they usually have their trade deadline in the first week of March, when about 75% of the season is gone. The NFL, I think, is they're nuts. Their trade deadline is around between week 8 and week 9, around halfway through the season.
And they have very few. They have the least amount of trades of any league.
Yeah, and they do. But I'm wondering, first of all, which one is the best? Which one is the most pleasing to the teams and the fans? But whether the NHL would ever consider changing their deadline to be similar to what MLB is, Kevin. I mean, do you think that there could be something like that where there's a deadline maybe a little earlier, but then there's a second deadline for guys who go through waivers?
Yeah, that would be interesting. I have never even thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Though I wonder whether or not you could actually get away with that. In baseball, it does happen pretty routinely, but I just can't see hockey teams allowing a guy to get through to somebody would pick him up in order to do that. But I don't know. I mean, I think the NHL trade deadline is the best because the NHL realized early that this was a marketing bonanza for them. Like, it's a very special day in the NHL, and there's a lot of interest. Like, there's more people that pay attention to the trade deadline, I think, than any other day of the season. Maybe opening day, but I don't think so. I think it's trade deadline, and even the Stanley Cup final, if your team's not in it, you tend to fade away. But that and free agent signing day. But I think the trade deadline is bigger because your team is still active. But because the teams are out of it, the fans were wondering what they're going to get for their rental players, and the teams are in it. They want to get help. Baseball, I would say, is second. And I find it interesting that baseball, and maybe Russ can comment on this too, because I know he's a big baseball fan like me. I find it curious that, much like the NHL, baseball is now starting to get a lot of deals done early. Like we've already seen a couple of pretty big deals transacted. And we have time before the trade deadline. And, of course, that's what has happened in the NHL as well.
Yeah, you are seeing more deals like that Met deal. That was more of a salary dump for Atlanta, but the Mets need players. Ramirez went. Cueto went. So you're right. I mean, they had some big wins, and maybe Cole Hamels could even go now, right? He pitched his no-hitter. But I still think baseball's is better, and I'll give the example of, I know it's tough when somebody gets picked up and they can't make it on the postseason roster, but I remember the one time the Yankees picked up Dave Kingman, and he wasn't on the postseason roster, but he still hit like 6 homers that they really needed down the stretch to sort of help them get there. And I just think the more help you can get for your team, the better. I think the NHL's done a fantastic job, and I think they're right up there with MLB, but I think that would be the one other tweak that would make it perfect.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Henderson, I remember years ago, went to the San Francisco Giants after August 31st and helped them. I don't know if they made the playoffs, but he helped them down the stretch. But no, the only problem with a baseball-style trade deadline in the NHL is the fact that MLB has no salary cap.
Right.
Whereas the NHL does. So if a team waives a player, say, the Leafs waived Dion Phaneuf, to make him eligible to be traded, nobody's going to pick him up because they can't fit $7 million under the cap. So really, that step it doesn't really matter.
For players that are impending UFAs that didn't get dealt.
Right, and then maybe that second deadline, if the NHL did that, would be for those players who are pending UFAs. You have a deadline for players other than those, and then a deadline for just those guys, because a rent-a-player and a non-rent-a-player trade deadline. Maybe that's how you would work it, because those teams, some teams are moving pending UFAs, Russ. They're not sure if they're in the playoff race or not, and maybe they want to hold on to those guys for another 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the one tweak they could do. I don't know what Kevin thinks.
Well, Major League Baseball, I saw the commissioner suggest he wanted to look at whether or not to move back the trade deadline, because they now have another wild card team, and there are more teams in, and teams do need the time. So it's pretty progressive thinking. I felt to me, you're thinking about how to make this more exciting, and just for the reasons that were just articulated, you don't know whether you're in. It allows you to keep your players a little bit longer, and what you want if you're baseball is for those guys to be involved in meaningful races, because usually the stars are getting moved. So in terms of rental players, so I mean, if you're baseball, you wanted Johnny Cueto to be moved. We want to see David Price get moved, so that he can be on a playoff team. So, but the Tigers probably could use a couple of weeks to sort whether or not they're in or out. I think they're out, but they're trying to convince themselves they're in.
Right,
yeah.
but the extenuating circumstance for a team like Detroit is, you got Miguel Cabrera out for probably another month, and that's why over the last couple of days they've been talking about trading Price and Cespedes and the guys that are free agents. So yeah, if the deadline was, say, August 15th, then they would be able to maybe have a better idea of where they're going to be, and then they could make a decision. But I don't think Cespedes and I don't think David Price are getting through waivers after July 31st, Russ.
No, I agree. They probably would not. This is where the NFL is like a real enigma too, because their trading deadline is the worst, and they're the most powerful, most popular league, and they almost don't seem to care to make it better. But that's an area of their sport where they really could make it better. And maybe it's because of their cap. I don't know. But they've never really had huge football trades. Now the NBA has trouble making trades, but they make them. And the NHL is going to be down that road very soon, where you're going to have these 6-player deals just to fit in guys under the cap, because this guy's expiring, this guy's here, this guy, it's coming. And so it does. The cap makes it a little tougher. It does.
Well,
but football trades have historically just not been made. It's and I'm never quite sure why. I mean, the cap certainly makes it difficult, but it doesn't seem to have the impact in the NFL that it does in baseball and hockey and basketball.
The Bills and the Eagles made that LaShawn McCoy deal earlier, and that was a player for player deal, and that's
rare,
really unusual in the NFL. But I mean, Kevin, the one thing that I've noticed, and I know that Eck has mentioned this a couple times, is the fact that there are trades made at the deadline. There are trades that are impactful, but it's not like it was 15, 20 years ago where there's mega deals being made. The cap has really affected that. You're now having a guy traded for a third-round pick, and most of those mega deals, as we know, because we were down there in Florida for the draft, were done the days before the draft. That seems to be the trend.
Well, the biggest difference between baseball and hockey, in my opinion, is in baseball, they view prospects as you want to build your team, but they also, it's almost like they're growing things to trade.
Right.
They have a garden, and they're going to pick a couple of carrots and move them out to get the player they want. Like, they think nothing of trading away their top pitcher in the minors to make a trade. And other than it seemed to me that Tim Murray sort of operates like that. Like, he thinks nothing of trading his prospects, to get a guy like Evander Kane. That's the first time that I've seen that. They're just NHL general managers are just more reluctant to trade top prospects. Where in baseball, usually when you see a guy move it, even a rental, there's a top player, top young prospect in the minors going back.
Yeah, the deal between the Royals and the Reds, the pitcher Finnegan for the Royals is one of their best prospects. But Russ, I mean, honestly, if you approached, like, if a team approached the Leafs about a deal, I mean, I know the Leafs are in a rebuild mode, but if the last guy they're going to trade is Mitch Marner, whereas in baseball they're going to be asking for a Mitch Marner or a William Nylander type of player.
It's not happening as much in baseball now, though. Teams like, you could see the Mets, they've already said, hey, these like 5 or 6 prospects we have, most of them pitching, are untouchable. That never used to happen, but it's starting to happen more. But you know what? I want to switch gears because NBC just put out their schedule, and they've got some great games lined up for this year.
Okay.
Opening night, doubleheader. October 7th is a rivalry night. So, like, the first game is Blackhawks Rangers, 8 o'clock. That's great, right? That's a heck of an opening night game for them. And then they follow it up with the Kings and Sharks for the doubleheader. That's a good opener, right? I mean, Kev, that's pretty good right there for ratings.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure, those are good opening. And the Wednesday night rivalry night has really worked out for them. Sometimes it's a bit of a stretch for the rivalry, but for the most part, they've had pretty good games on there.
Yeah, the Winter Classic is a 1 o'clock game. That's good. January 1st. That gives you a little leeway with the weather. It's always good because you can always change the time on it, right? It never starts at 1. That's the one thing I've learned about covering all the Winter Classics. They never start on time. It's 1:15, it's 1:20, it's 1:40. It's depending on how the weather is that day. So that's good. They get built-in flexibility.
It's Montreal, Boston, correct?
Yeah, and they're showing all the Stadium Series games, which I think is great. That's like, people love those games. Even people who don't love hockey like those games. So they're showing all that. The All-Star game. They're having the Thanksgiving game again, the Thanksgiving Showdown, which I think is a good thing. They sort of slid that in. Like last year, I think was the first time they slid that in, right? And so this year they're doing Bruins Rangers. I mean, that's good. I mean, that's going to get a pretty good rating for them. And then they have a 5 o'clock West Coast game, Ducks Blackhawks. So they might get a little bit of ratings on Thanksgiving where it was probably dead years ago.
Well, let me ask this, Captain, because I know that the NBA owns Christmas when it comes to. I mean, occasionally there's an NFL game if Christmas falls on a weekend. I know that there's the break that the NHL has. I think it's from the 23rd to the 26th. Is there any thought of them availing themselves of the opportunity that the NBA is enjoying and going and playing on Christmas Day?
I know the players have been resistant of that, so I mean, I'm sure it's been discussed for sure. But I think their argument was because, hey, look, we took over, we own New Year's Day,
right.
And they've carved out a nice piece, and the players really love that break, that Christmas break. So, and most of these negotiations or I should say, these last 2 negotiations have mostly been about givebacks. So this is something you can give the players that pleases them. I mean, they're really the only 2 things they have are the Christmas break and 3 things: the days off during the season, and then Olympic participation. And now that looks like the NHL is not sold, obviously, on going to the Olympics, so that could fall by the wayside.
Yeah, and here's the one other thing. Now, there are always detractors for the NHL bitching about marketing this, marketing that. And really, 10 years ago, I was on that wagon too, like, hey, you've got to market your young talent. You're not doing that enough. But they've done a good job over the years, and this is proof that they even are taking it to the next level. So they're pushing a game already. They're saying, hey, this will be the first matchup on U.S. soil between Connor McDavid and Jack Eichel March 1st. that's really good. That says a lot for the game, and I think by the time that game hits, there'll be quite a bit of buzz in that.
I would agree.
Yep. All right, guys, great show. We will be back tomorrow with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast with Eklund. He should be back, and I'm sure he'll have some rumors. For Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.